The bulb above the sink kept flickering, throwing small, nervous flashes across the kitchen wall. The smell of cold curry lingered like an unwanted guest, clinging to every corner. I stood there, fingers still wet from the dishes I had half-washed, trying to ignore the way the silence was thick enough to choke on. "My name is Rafiq," I whispered to myself, though no one was listening. "And tonight, my wife called me useless." It wasn't the first time she'd been angry with me, but this time, the word didn't just land, it stayed, echoing inside my skull, settling somewhere behind my ribs where it hurt to breathe. Sadia stood near the counter, her back turned to me. She was still in her office clothes, pale blue shirt, black trousers, and that faint scent of perfume she always wore when she had late meetings. Her fingers trembled slightly as she poured herself tea, but her voice when she spoke was sharp, controlled. "You think everything will just fix itself, don't you?" she said. "That somehow, one day, a miracle will drop money into our laps." "Rafiq, I can't live like this anymore." I didn't answer. I didn't trust my voice not to break. The clock ticked behind her, slow, deliberate. Each tick seemed to underline her words. "I'm trying, Sadia," I said finally. "You know the company downsized." "It wasn't." She cut me off. "It's always something with you. A company, a client, a friend who didn't pay. Do you realize how embarrassing it is when my colleagues talk about their husbands, managers, engineers, businessmen, and I have to stay quiet." Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried more weight than shouting ever could. Our daughter, Hira, had already gone to bed. I was thankful for that. No child should hear the way a mother's disappointment sounds when it finally runs out of patience. I stared at the cracked edge of the kitchen counter. There was a small chip shaped like a crescent moon, something I used to notice when we first moved in. Back then, we laughed about it. "It gives the kitchen character," she'd said once. I wanted to remind her of that moment, to pull her back to the version of us that used to smile at small imperfections. But the air was too heavy now. She turned around, cup in hand, eyes red and tired. "You're a good father, I'll give you that," she said quietly. "But as a husband, you become useless." The word landed softly, almost gently, but the cruelty was in the calmness. I looked at her, searching for some flicker of regret, but she just sipped her tea, gaze fixed on nothing. I wanted to defend myself, to list every late night I'd spent job hunting, every time I'd skipped lunch, so Hira could have her favorite snack after school. But something inside me had already caved in. So instead, I nodded. "Okay," I said. Just that. One word to hide 100 unspoken ones. Her shoulders dropped slightly, as if my surrender somehow exhausted her too. The kettle hissed softly behind us. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The whole world seemed to shrink to that dim kitchen, two people standing inches apart, but living in different universes. After a while, she left the room. The faint click of her heels on the floor faded down the hallway. The bedroom door closed, and the house exhaled a long, aching silence. I stayed where I was. The bulb flickered again, buzzing weakly, its light trembling on the rim of the teacup she'd left behind. When I finally walked to the living room, I felt like an intruder in my own home. The couch creaked as I sat down, the fabric cold against my back. I looked around at the familiar things, the photo frames on the wall, Hira's school bag by the door, the half-dead plant Sadia kept forgetting to water. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling fan. It spun lazily, one blade slightly bent, making a faint clicking sound with each turn. I counted them like seconds. 1, 2, 3. Anything to keep my mind from replaying her voice. Useless. It wasn't just a word. It was a verdict. I remembered when Sadia used to call me her rock, when she said she could face anything as long as I stood beside her. What changed? Or maybe I changed, softened, slowed, broke somewhere along the line. I turned on my side, pulling a small cushion under my head. The couch smelled faintly of detergent and dust. My body ached, but it was the kind of ache that comes from sadness, not strain. Through the half-open curtain, I could see the yellow light from the street lamp spilling into the room. The night outside was quiet, except for the distant hum of a motorbike passing by. For a moment, I thought I heard her moving in the bedroom, maybe pacing, maybe crying. I wanted to go check, to say something that could undo what had been said, but pride held me back. Instead, I closed my eyes. Sleep didn't come. Memories did. Her laughter in the university canteen. The smell of her mehndi during our engagement. The day Hira was born, and she held my hand, whispering, "We did it, Rafiq." I wanted to hold on to those images, but they kept slipping away, replaced by tonight's cold words. I don't know how long I lay there before the phone buzzed on the table. The sound broke the silence like a whisper in a mosque. At first, I ignored it. Then curiosity won. I leaned over and looked at the screen. It wasn't my phone, it was hers. She must have left it there earlier when she walked past. The notification glowed faintly. A message from a name I didn't recognize. "Arif, hope you're okay. Call me when you can." For a second, I thought maybe it was a work message. Sadia had plenty of colleagues. But then I remembered something. The slight smile she'd worn last week when she typed on her phone. The way she turned the screen away when I entered the room. My chest tightened. I didn't open the message. I couldn't, but I couldn't look away either. The small blue glow of her screen felt like a secret whispering in the dark. I placed the phone back carefully and lay down again, pretending to sleep. The fan kept spinning. The bulb kept flickering. And somewhere between one heartbeat and the next, I realized tonight wasn't just about losing my dignity. Something deeper had cracked open, something I didn't yet have words for. I turned my face to the back of the couch and closed my eyes. Tomorrow would come, as as it always does. But I already knew it wouldn't be the same kind of morning anymore. The next morning felt heavier than usual. The sunlight filtering through the curtains looked dull, as if the world itself had lost color overnight. Sadia moved around the kitchen in silence, the clinking of plates and the hiss of the kettle the only sounds between us. Kira sat at the table, half asleep over her cereal, glancing between us as if trying to measure the distance that had grown in one night. I wanted to speak, to say something normal like, "You'll be late for school," or "Do you want another paratha?" But the word stayed trapped in my throat. Sadia didn't look at me once. When they both left, her to work, Kira to school, the house felt quiet again. I sat by the window with a cup of tea gone cold, watching a stray cat wander through the street. That's when the memories came rushing back, uninvited but relentless, like a tide I couldn't stop. It's strange how the mind works. When the present hurts, it clings to the past for air. I still remember the first time I saw Sadia. It was during my final year at university. She was standing in the canteen line, arguing with the server about getting extra chutney. I remember laughing under my breath at how serious she looked over something so small. She turned around, caught me smiling, and frowned. Then, to my surprise, smiled back. That's how it began, not with grand gestures, but with a shared laugh over spicy samosas. Sadia wasn't like other girls. She spoke with purpose, every word crisp and certain. I was quieter, the type who listened more than I talked. But she said she liked that about me, that I made her feel heard. We'd sit for hours under the neem tree behind the library, sharing tea from a cracked cup, talking about everything. Her dream of working in marketing, my plan to start a small business one day. The world back then felt big and kind. We thought love could solve anything. I remember one evening, during monsoon season, when rain drenched the campus. Everyone ran for shelter, but we stayed behind, laughing as water pooled around our shoes. Her mehndi was still dark from Eid, and its fragrance mixed with the scent of weather. She looked at me and said, "Promise me, no matter what happens, we'll never stop being a team." I promised, and for a long time we were. We got married 2 years later, a simple ceremony in her parents' courtyard. Strings of yellow lights, the sound of laughter, the smell of biryani in the air. I still remember the way she looked at me during the nikah, eyes bright, confident, full of belief. The first few years were good. Small apartment, small dreams, but big love. I opened a printing shop with borrowed money. She found a job at a marketing firm. We would joke about who worked harder, and she'd tease, "At least I have an AC office. You have sweat and ink." Then, slowly, things changed. My business took a hit when a client defaulted on a large payment. I tried to recover, took another loan, but the market shifted, and suddenly my shop was sinking faster than I could save it. Sadia's career, on the other hand, bloomed. She moved from desk work to presentations, from a small cubicle to her own cabin. I was proud of her, genuinely proud, but somewhere between her promotions and my failures, a quiet wall began to rise. It wasn't her fault entirely. I stopped talking as much. I started pretending everything was fine, even when it wasn't. Every "don't worry, I'll fix it" became another brick between us. She started staying later at work. I told myself it was just her job. When she came home tired, I'd make her tea and listen as she complained about clients. I thought I was helping, being the steady one. But maybe, to her, I started looking like a man stuck in place. There was one evening I'll never forget. She came home late, still dressed in her office clothes, holding her phone close as if it were fragile. I had gone to her office earlier that day, a surprise visit to drop off the lunchbox she'd forgotten. When I entered, she looked startled. Her smile seemed forced. She quickly locked a drawer in her desk when she saw me. I didn't ask what was inside. I didn't want to seem suspicious. But as I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of a folded note sticking out from under a file. It had a man's handwriting. Even now, I remember the neat cursive, the blue ink, the way her hand trembled slightly when she covered it. That night, she told me she had to work on a new project with her boss. Long hours, weekend meetings. I nodded, trying to sound supportive, but something in her tone felt different, distant. Still, I told myself love needs trust, not interrogation. I kept doing what I always did: school runs, grocery lists, fixing leaky taps, searching for jobs online. Life became mechanical, like turning pages in a book you no longer enjoy but still refuse to close. Sometimes I'd wake up late at night and find her sitting on the balcony, phone glowing in her hand, expression unreadable. When she noticed me, she'd smile faintly and say, "Couldn't sleep. Too many deadlines." I wanted to believe her. I truly did. But somewhere deep inside, a quiet ache began to grow. The kind that doesn't scream, just hums beneath the skin until it becomes part of you. Now, sitting in the same house years later, with her words still ringing in my ears, I realized how far we had drifted. The woman who once called me her rock now saw me as a weight pulling her down. The tea in my hand had gone completely cold. A fly buzzed around the rim. I set it down and rubbed my face, feeling the roughness of unshaved stubble. I wondered if she thought about those early days, about laughter under the neem tree, about rain, about promises made without fear. Or had she buried them somewhere beneath ambition and exhaustion? Outside, the sky began to cloud over again, the kind of gray that announces rain. I closed my eyes and let the memory of that first monsoon return. Her laughter, the smell of wet earth, the echo of her voice saying, "We'll always be a team." Somewhere between then and now, I'd lost her. Or maybe, I thought bitterly, she'd simply outgrown me. The thunder outside rolled softly, like distant applause for a tragedy secretly no one wanted to witness. And in that dim room, for the first time, I began to wonder, what if the message from Arif last night wasn't just work after all? The thoughts settled like a stone in my chest, heavy and cold. I told myself I wouldn't check her phone again. I wouldn't become that kind of man. But a voice inside me whispered, "You already know, Rafiq. You just don't want to see it." I stood up, staring at the window, watching the first drops of rain blur the world outside. Once, rain had been ours. Now, it only reminded me of everything that had washed away. The morning came heavy with gray light and the faint call of the azan echoing through the colony. I hadn't really slept. Every time I closed my eyes, her voice replayed, sharp, cold, final. By the time dawn brushed against the curtains, I'd given up on rest. I sat on the edge of the couch, rubbing my temples, waiting for the house to wake. The smell of parathas wafted in from the kitchen, mixed with a faint scent of detergent. Sadia moved quietly, as if afraid even sound could start another argument. She didn't glance at me when I entered, just asked Hira to finish her breakfast. Hira's eyes darted between us, cautious, curious. Children sense tension before they understand it. She tried to break the silence. "Abu, can you drop me to school today?" I smiled faintly. "Of course, Beta." Sadia's hand froze mid-motion as she buttered toast. I saw her jaw tighten, but she said nothing. It was small, that flicker of annoyance, but it told me how far we'd fallen. Even the smallest kindness between us now felt like trespassing. After breakfast, I went to the porch to start my bike. The air was cool, the kind of crisp morning that should have felt fresh, but somehow didn't. The neighbor's radio was playing an old ghazal, something about lost love and unspoken apologies. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sadia stepped out, adjusting her dupatta. Her car keys jingled in her hand. "You don't need to wait," she said flatly. "I'll manage." "I didn't say I was waiting," I replied gently. She looked at me, just for a moment, eyes rimmed with fatigue, maybe guilt. Then she walked to the car. Moments later, I heard the sound of the engine failing. Once, twice, again. A hollow sputter, then silence. She sighed, slamming the door harder than necessary. I hesitated, then walked over. "Battery problem?" She didn't look up. "It's fine. It's not starting," I said, trying to keep my tone calm. I said I'll handle it. Her pride stood between us like a wall made of glass, thin but impossible to cross without bleeding. I nodded and stepped back. "Okay, handle it." I turned to leave, pretending to check my phone. Behind me, she tried the ignition again. The car coughed, whined, then died completely. A small sound of frustration escaped her lips, half sigh, half groan. She stepped out, checked her watch, and finally looked my way. "Rafiq," she began, voice low. I turned slowly, hiding the tiny ache of victory I didn't want to feel. "Yes. Can you give me a ride? My phone's dead, I can't book a cab, and I have a presentation at 9. For a moment, I almost said no, almost reminded her that I was the man she called useless. But something inside me, maybe habit, maybe love, didn't let me. "Of course," I said simply. "Let's go." She hesitated, then nodded, clutching her handbag like a shield. The ride began in silence. The road was wet from the light rain last night, the smell of damp earth mixing with exhaust fumes. The city was waking up, vendors setting up stalls, school children in uniforms crossing the street, women with baskets full of bread and milk hurrying home. She sat behind me, hands barely touching my shoulders. Once, she used to hold me tightly, head resting against my back. Now, she sat like a stranger forced to share a seat. Halfway to her office, we stopped at a red light. I caught our reflection in the mirror, her face turned away, mine expressionless. Two people bound by routine, not affection. When the light turned green, I accelerated, and that's when it happened. A small car ahead of us braked suddenly. I swerved to avoid it, and the bike skidded slightly on the wet road. For a second, I felt her hands clutch my jacket instinctively. We didn't fall, but the scare left her breathless. "Are you crazy?" she shouted. "You could have killed us." "I'm sorry," I said. "The car. I told you to be careful." Her voice trembled with anger, but underneath it, I caught something else, fear. She hadn't planned for that slip, for that moment of helplessness that made her grab me without thinking. I parked by the roadside to steady the bike. "Are you hurt?" She didn't answer, just adjusted her dupatta again, her fingers shaking slightly. When I looked closer, I noticed a faint dent on her car's rearview mirror, the one that had bumped us before we swerved. The driver, an older man, stepped out apologetically. "Sorry, Beta, my brakes slipped," he said, looking flustered. "It's all right, Uncle," I said quickly. "No one's hurt." He nodded and drove off. Sadia turned to me, her face pale. "The insurance," she murmured suddenly. I didn't renew it last month." I sighed quietly. "It's fine. There's no damage." She stared at me for a moment, confused. Maybe she expected me to scold her, to use this as a chance to strike back. But I didn't. I just started the bike again. The rest of the ride passed in silence. When we finally reached her office gate, she climbed off slowly, fixing her hair. Her eyes flit toward the entrance, and that's when I saw him. A man in a gray suit, tall, confident, holding a folder in one hand. His smile was polished, the kind people practice in mirrors. He walked straight toward her. "Morning, Sadia," he said smoothly. Her voice softened instantly. "Morning, Arif." My stomach tightened. So it was him, the name from the message. Arif glanced at me briefly, just long enough to recognize that I was no one important in his world. Then he turned back to her, lowering his voice slightly as he handed her the folder. "Your slides look perfect," he said. "Don't worry, you'll nail it." She smiled, that same small curve of lips I hadn't seen in months. "Thanks." I didn't wait for introductions. I didn't trust myself to stand there. I'll head back, I said quietly. She looked at me then, as if remembering I existed. Yes, thank you for the ride. Her tone was polite, formal even. The kind you reserve for strangers who do you small favors. I nodded once and turned the bike around. As I drove away, the reflection of her standing beside Arif in the side mirror grew smaller and smaller until the rain blurred it completely. The ache that settled inside me wasn't sharp. It was deep, dull, and endless, like the sound of distant thunder that never quite reaches you but never stops either. When I reached home, the house felt emptier than ever. I parked the bike, took off my helmet, and stood by the door, staring at the quiet rooms inside. The kettle was still where she'd left it, half-filled. Her perfume still lingered faintly in the hallway. I sat down on the couch, the same one where I'd lain awake last night, and let out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The ceiling fan spun lazily again, clicking softly. Everything was the same, and yet I knew something irreversible had begun. Somewhere between her cold silence and that morning ride, the distance between us had turned into a canyon. And deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling. The real storm hadn't even started yet. That afternoon, the house felt like a stranger's place. Too quiet, too neat, too hollow. Every tick of the clock echoed louder than it should have. The faint scent of her perfume still lingered, stubbornly refusing to fade, like a ghost that didn't know it was supposed to leave. I made tea for myself, a habit born from lonely days. The kettle whistled sharply, and I poured the steaming liquid into the chipped white cup Sadia used to call your bachelor mug. I smiled faintly at the memory. She had once teased me about not knowing how to make proper tea. Back then, she'd fix it for me. Extra milk, less sugar, exactly how I liked it. Now I stirred it absently, tasting only bitterness. The clock struck 10. Hira would be in school till noon. Sadia would be in her office, probably smiling that soft, practiced smile at clients and colleagues. Maybe at him. That name, Arif, kept circling my thoughts like a fly I couldn't swat away. I told myself I wasn't jealous. I told myself it was just suspicion, insecurity, projection. But deep inside, I knew better. Something about the way she looked at him had spoken louder than words. I opened my laptop to distract myself, tried scrolling through job portals again. Each rejection email felt heavier than the last. We regret to inform you, the position has been filled. You are overqualified. Overqualified. What a cruel word. They didn't mean it as praise. It was just another polite way of saying you don't fit anymore. I closed the laptop and rubbed my eyes. Outside, the neighborhood came alive. Vendors shouting prices, motorbikes revving, children chasing a plastic ball down the street. The world kept moving, indifferent to the small tragedies happening inside four walls. When the doorbell rang around noon, I assumed it was the delivery guy. But when I opened the door, it wasn't him. It was Sadia. She stood there, holding her purse loosely in one hand, her hair slightly disheveled, her lipstick faded. She looked tired. You're home early, I said, surprised. She walked past me without answering, straight to the living room. Her heels clicked against the floor, sharp, uneven, rushed. I forgot my presentation notes, she said finally. They're in the drawer by the desk. I nodded and fetched the folder for her, but as I handed it over, she didn't take it immediately. Her eyes, still sharp from the morning's tension, softened for a moment. Thanks, she murmured. Everything all right? I asked cautiously. She hesitated. It's fine. Just a stressful morning. Something in her tone made me pause. The presentation? No, she said quickly. It's not that. I mean, she stopped, exhaled. Forget it. You wouldn't understand. Her words landed heavier than she intended. I saw it in her face, the instant regret, the flash of guilt, but she didn't take them back. I forced a small smile. Maybe not, but I'd still listen if you wanted to talk. She looked at me then, really looked for the first time in weeks. You always say that, she whispered, and then you turn everything into pity. I don't need pity, Rafiq. I need respect. It felt like a punch I didn't see coming. I've never disrespected you, I said quietly. Maybe not in words, she replied, but in silence, yes. In inaction. You just watch life happen instead of being part of it. Her voice trembled near the end, the edge of anger giving way to exhaustion. Before I could respond, her phone buzzed. She checked the screen, her posture stiffening. It's Arif, she said before catching herself. Then more softly, he's reminding me about the client call. She picked up her bag, avoiding my gaze. I have to go. I stepped aside. She left without another word. The sound of the closing door lingered, final, echoing. I sat back down, staring at the cup of cold tea. Her words replayed again and again. You just watched life happen instead of being part of it. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had become passive, letting the world drift by while I stayed stuck in yesterday's failures. But how do you fight when you've already lost the will to lift your arms? That evening, I picked Hira up from school. She chattered about her art project and the teacher who said her drawing was the best in class. I smiled, nodding at every word. Her innocence was a small island of peace in my storm. Abu, will Mama come to the parent day next week? She asked suddenly. I'm sure she will, I said. You both right. I hesitated. We'll see. She frowned. You always say that. Kids notice everything. Back home, Sadia was already there, sitting at the dining table with her laptop open and papers scattered. She didn't look up as we entered. Go wash your hands, Hira, she said, her tone automatic. Hira ran off. I stood there for a moment, watching Sadia type furiously. Long day, I asked. She didn't answer. Then after a beat, she said, I got the client deal. That's great. Arif helped with the data analysis, she added, almost defensively. He's good at that stuff. I nodded slowly. I'm glad you have helped. She looked up then, searching my face for sarcasm, but found none. That almost seemed to annoy her more. You don't have to act so saintly, she said. It's okay to be angry sometimes. I met her gaze, and what would anger fix? She opened her mouth to reply but didn't. For a fleeting second, something vulnerable crossed her eyes, like she wanted to say sorry but couldn't find the shape of the word. Hira returned with her coloring book, climbing onto my lap. Mama, look, she said, waving a crayon drawing. It's us. Sadia smiled faintly. It's beautiful, sweetheart. I looked closer. The picture was simple, a stick figure family, hand in hand. But there was something that made my chest heighten. In her drawing, Mama and Abu were holding each other's hands, smiling under a sun that said happy family. When Hira ran off to show the maid, Sadia stared at the drawing left on the table. For the first time in a long while, I saw her blink rapidly, not out of irritation, but emotion. Kids live in a world where things are simple, she said softly. Maybe they're lucky. Maybe they still believe fixing things is possible, I replied. She looked at me then, not angry, not cold, just tired. Maybe. That night, she worked late in the study. I could hear the faint clatter of the keyboard through the half-closed door. Every so often, I'd see her silhouette against the light, focused, distant, beautiful in that untouchable way people become when they build walls. I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of rain beginning to fall outside. Each drop tapped against the window, steady and unrelenting. And with each sound, one truth grew clearer in my heart. She wasn't just slipping away. She was already gone, emotionally, quietly, completely. And all I could do was listen to the rain, pretending it wasn't the sound of something breaking inside me. The morning after that restless night was heavier than any silence I'd ever known. Sadia moved around the house with her practiced grace, coffee brewing, phone glued to her hand, as if the world hadn't shifted. But something had cracked, invisible yet loud enough for my heart to hear. Her eyes wouldn't meet mine. Her voice carried no warmth, just the tone of someone maintaining routine to hide chaos. I knew then that the truth wasn't waiting to be found outside our walls. It lived here now, between our half-finished sentences and the lies we told with smiles. That evening, as rain began to fall, she came home late again. The drops beat against the windows like impatient fingers. I watched her through the reflection in the mirror, her soaked apata, her trembling hands trying to unlock the cupboard. Tough day? I asked softly. She froze for a second, then replied, just long meetings. Her tone was steady, rehearsed, but her eyes flickered when she noticed the envelope I had placed on the table, the one she had hidden in her drawer weeks ago. You dropped this the other day, I said. It has a man's handwriting. Arif, right? The color drained from her face. Rafiq, don't start, she whispered. I'm not starting, I said, my voice calm. It's already started. For a moment, I thought she might confess, but she simply turned away, muttering, you're imagining things again. Then she disappeared into the bedroom, leaving the envelope untouched between us like a wound we both refused to clean. That night, I couldn't sleep. The ceiling fan hummed its endless rhythm, blades slicing through the humid air, counting the seconds of my denial. I kept seeing her walking into that hotel, the way her hand brushed against her scarf nervously. I had convinced myself maybe it wasn't what it looked like, but now there was no mistaking it. In the mirror across the room, I saw my own reflection staring back, tired eyes, sagging shoulders, the look of a man who had given everything and received silence in return. I didn't look like a husband anymore. I looked like a ghost, still haunting the memory of a marriage. By dawn, I decided I couldn't keep pretending. When she stepped into the kitchen, I was waiting there with 2 cups of tea. We need to talk, I said. Not now, Rafiq. I'm already late. You're always late, I said quietly, but not for him. Her head snapped up, fury rising. How dare you? I was outside that hotel, I interrupted. I saw you, Sadia. The words hung in the air like broken glass. For a few seconds, I thought she'd finally admit it, but then she took a slow breath, straightened her dupatta, and whispered, believe what you want. And that hurt more than the betrayal itself, her indifference, the refusal to fight for what we once had. I looked at her one last time, really looked. The woman I had fallen in love with, the girl from the university canteen who laughed at my bad jokes, she wasn't there anymore. What stood before me was someone polished, tired, armored in pride. Later that night, when Hira came into the living room, she found me sitting in the dark. Abu, why are you crying? She asked, holding her stuffed hair. I wiped my eyes quickly. Just something in my eye beta. She tilted her head. You always say that. Her innocence shattered the last of my restraint. I couldn't let her grow up watching 2 strangers share a home built on silence. When the house finally fell asleep, I walked to the desk and pulled out a piece of paper. My hand trembled as I wrote 2 words. I forgive you. Not because she deserved it, but because I needed peace more than revenge. I placed the note on her dressing table beside her perfume, the same one that used to fill our house with laughter. Then I packed a small bag, just my wallet, a change of clothes, and the old photograph of us from our wedding day. I looked at it one last time before slipping it inside. The night air outside was cool and damp. I stepped out quietly, closing the door behind me without sound. The street was empty, the world asleep, unaware that one man had just left behind his entire life. But just as my foot touched the gate, a sound tore through the stillness, a scream. High-pitched, raw, unmistakably hers. My heart heart slammed against my chest. I ran back inside. She was on the floor near the bed, her face pale, her body convulsing. Sadia, I shouted, rushing to her side. Her lips were trembling, trying to form words that wouldn't come. Hira, call an ambulance, I yelled, my voice cracking. Her small feet pounded across the hallway, fumbling with the phone as I lifted Sadia's head onto my lap. Her eyes fluttered open for a second, not in anger now, but confusion, fear, and something else I hadn't seen in years, helplessness. Hold on, Sadia. Just hold on, I whispered, brushing hair from her forehead. In that moment, every ounce of anger inside me melted into something heavier, responsibility, love, instinct. The woman who had broken me now needed me to keep her alive. The sirens echoed through the colony minutes later, red lights flashing against the walls that had witnessed our quiet war. Paramedics lifted her onto the stretcher, and I followed without thinking, barefoot, carrying the bag that was meant for my escape. Inside the ambulance, I held her hand. Her pulse was faint, her breathing shallow, and as the city lights blurred past the windows, I realized I might never hear her call me by my name again. I leaned close and whispered, "You're going to be okay." She didn't respond, but her fingers twitched faintly against mine. For a moment, everything was quiet, just the hum of the road and the beating of the heart monitor, and I understood what it meant to love someone even after they've stopped deserving it. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and fear. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, cold and unforgiving, while nurses moved briskly through the corridors. I followed the stretcher as they wheeled Sadia into the emergency room, my heart hammering with a rhythm that didn't belong to me anymore. They closed the doors, leaving me outside. For the first time in years, I felt completely powerless, not because she had insulted me, not because she had betrayed me, but because I couldn't fix her pain. Minutes crawled by like hours. Hira sat on the plastic chair beside me, clutching her teddy bear, her small face pale and terrified. "Abu," she whispered. "Mama will be fine, right?" I nodded, though my voice caught in my throat. "Yes, Beta, she will be fine." I wanted to believe it. I needed to. The doctor finally stepped out, mask lowered, expression grave. "She's stable for now," he said. "It appears to be a mild stroke, possibly stress-induced. We'll keep her under observation tonight." A stroke. The word slammed into me harder than any insult ever could. I pressed my hand against my forehead, trying to make sense of it. She was only 42. Strong, determined, always in control. But even steel bends under enough pressure. They moved her into a private room. The monitors beeped softly beside her bed. That sound became my heartbeat for the next few hours. I sat in the corner chair, eyes fixed on the rise and fall of her chest. The woman who had called me useless now lay helpless before me, fragile as a leaf trembling on a branch. At one point, her eyelids fluttered. I leaned forward, my hand instinctively reaching for hers. "Sadia, can you hear me?" Her lips moved, barely forming words. I bent closer. "Rafiq." It wasn't Arif's name that came out. It was mine. And that simple whisper broke me all over again. Not in anger this time, but in something gentler, sadder. I brushed her hair back from her forehead. "I'm here," I said softly. "Don't worry about anything." She closed her eyes again, and a single tear slipped down her temple. I didn't know if it was from pain or regret. Maybe both. The night stretched endlessly. Machines hummed. The corridor clock ticked, and my mind drifted through the years, the laughter we once shared, the way she used to fall asleep mid-sentence during our first months of marriage, her head on my shoulder. I remember the day she got her first big promotion, and how proud I was, even though part of me feared being left behind. Now here she was, and none of her titles mattered. None of her pride, or mine. It was just two people caught in the quiet aftermath of love and mistakes. A nurse sent her to check her vitals. "She's lucky you brought her in so quickly," she said. "Another few minutes, and it could have been worse." Lucky. The word tasted strange. Was it luck or irony? When the nurse left, I stood by the window, watching the city lights blink through the rain. Somewhere out there, Arif was probably asleep, unaware that the woman he had entangled himself with was lying in a hospital bed, fighting for breath. For a fleeting moment, anger tried to crawl back into my heart. I imagined calling him, shouting, blaming, but then I looked back at Sadia, pale and still, and it all felt meaningless. What was the point of blame when life itself could end in a blink? At dawn, I called Sadia's younger brother to inform him. He promised to come later in the day. Hira had fallen asleep on the waiting room bench, her head resting on my arm. I sat there, stroking her hair, realizing that no matter what had happened between us adults, she didn't deserve to lose her mother. Around 7 a.m., the doctor returned with a clipboard. "She's conscious now," he said. "You can see her." I stepped inside. Sadia was awake, her eyes glassy but aware. When she saw me, her lips trembled. "What happened?" she whispered. "You fainted," I said gently. "It was a mild stroke. You need to rest." She tried to lift her hand, but it shook violently. I held it steady. For the first time, she didn't pull away. "Rafiq," her voice cracked. "I'm sorry." I didn't answer. The apology wasn't for me to collect right now. It was for her to heal through. "Rest," I murmured. "We'll talk later." She closed her eyes again, exhausted. I sat beside her, the silence between us different this time. Not cold, not angry, just fragile. By mid-morning, the doctor spoke to me again. "She'll need long-term care," he said. "Physiotherapy, medication, follow-up visits. Stress management will be crucial." I nodded. "We'll manage." He gave me a long look. "It won't be easy," he said softly. "She'll depend on you for a while." "Depend on me. The irony of that sentence didn't escape me. The same woman who once told me I was useless now couldn't move her hand without my help. That afternoon, when she woke again, she looked around the room nervously. "Where's Arif?" she asked, her voice thin. I didn't answer immediately. I could have told her the truth, that he hadn't shown up, that he probably never would, but I simply said, "No one else was there, Sadia. Just me." Something in her expression broke. She turned her face away, tears welling up silently. I didn't move closer, didn't offer comfort. Not yet. Sometimes, facing emptiness is the only way people see who truly stands beside them. Hours passed. Machines beeped steadily. The sky outside turned gold, then gray again. At sunset, the nurse came to adjust her 4 lines. Sadia looked at me, voice barely a whisper. "Will you take me home?" Her eyes were soft now. No arrogance, no distance, just a quiet plea. I hesitated for a breath. Then I nodded. "Yes," I said. "When the doctor allows, I'll take you home." She closed her eyes and smiled faintly, the first genuine smile I had seen in months. And as the night folded around us once more, I realized that sometimes life finds the most painful ways to restore balance. She had broken me with her words, and now those same words echoed in my mind with an entirely different meaning. Useless, she had called me. But tonight, she needed me more than anyone ever had. The morning she was discharged, sunlight spilled weakly through the hospital blinds, turning everything pale gold. Sadia sat upright in bed, her face thinner, her eyes softer than I'd ever seen. The nurses held her dress, adjusting the shawl over her trembling shoulders. She looked at me like a stranger who suddenly realized she had known me all her life. "I'm ready," she said quietly. Her voice carried none of the pride that used to fill our home, only exhaustion and maybe gratitude. The drive back home was silent. The city outside moved as it always did, rickshaws buzzing, vendors shouting, buses groaning through traffic. But inside the car, time felt suspended. I caught her stealing glances at me in the rearview mirror, as if she was trying to remember who I was, the man beneath the disappointment. When we reached the gate, Hira ran out barefoot. "Mama," she cried, her small arms wrapping tightly around Sadia's waist. For a moment, Sadia's lips quivered. She bent down and hugged her daughter with a kind of tenderness that once came easily. I stood at a distance, letting them have that moment. Inside, the house felt different. It wasn't filled with tension anymore, but something quieter, like the air after a storm, heavy but healing. I made her tea, carefully placing the cup on the side table beside the sofa. She tried to hold it, but her hands shook, spilling a few drops. Without thinking, I reached out and steadied her grip. She didn't pull away this time. Days turned into weeks, and our lives fell into a new rhythm, one built on necessity rather than habit. I became her caretaker. I cooked, cleaned, managed her medicines, and helped her walk from one room to another. Every small act became a silent conversation between us. Sometimes, while I combed her hair, I'd catch her watching me in the mirror, eyes glistening, lips parted as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the courage. One evening, as I placed her dinner tray on the table, she finally whispered, "You shouldn't have stayed." I looked at her, unsure how to respond. "You could have walked away," she continued, her voice trembling. "After everything I said to you, after what I did, I wouldn't have blamed you." I sat down beside her. "Maybe I did walk away," I said softly, "but when I turned around, you had fallen." Her eyes filled with tears. "Why are you still being kind to me, Rafiq?" I took a slow breath, because kindness isn't something you give only when it's earned. It's something you choose when the world stops making sense. She looked down, her tears falling silently onto her lap. That was the night the walls between us truly began to crumble. Over the following weeks, I watched pride drain from her like color fading from an old photograph. She spoke less, listened more, and every thank you carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken apologies. One night, as I tucked the blanket around her legs, she grabbed my hand suddenly. "Rafiq!" her voice cracked. "I don't deserve this. I don't deserve you." I sat beside her. "Maybe not," I said honestly, "but our daughter does. She deserves a home that still stands." Sadia sobbed then, not the controlled tears of guilt, but the raw, messy kind that come from deep regret. She pressed her face into her palms. "I was so blind," she whispered. "I thought success meant never needing anyone. I forgot what love looked like." I didn't respond. Words would have ruined the silence that was finally mending us. I simply handed her a tissue, then quietly turned off the lamp. In the dim light, her breathing slowed, steady again for the first time in months. I sat there in the chair beside her bed, watching the rise and fall of her chest, realizing that sometimes forgiveness isn't spoken, it's lived. The next morning, a letter arrived. The postman handed it to Hira, who brought it inside, waving it playfully. "Mama, it's from your office," she said. Sadia took it hesitantly. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. The paper was short, an official notice from the corporate department. Arif's name was bolded across the top. Her eyes widened. She read it again and again, then slowly placed it on the table. "What is it?" I asked. She swallowed hard. "Arif has been arrested," she whispered. "Fraud, company funds, everything's gone." The room fell silent. Hira looked at both of us, confused. Sadia's lips trembled as she whispered, "He told me it was temporary, that he'd fix things." Her tears fell onto the letter. For a moment, I almost pitied her. She turned to me, eyes red and broken. "You warned me," she said, "and I didn't listen." I nodded slowly. Sometimes people only see the truth when everything else is taken away. She stared at the floor, floor, silent. Then, in a voice so faint it was almost a prayer, she said, "Thank you for staying. That evening, I made tea for both of us." We sat by the window, the sunset pouring golden light across the floor. She sipped quietly, her movements slow but deliberate. For the first time in years, there was no bitterness in the air, only acceptance. Later, as I helped her walk to bed, she stopped near the mirror. Her reflection stared back, pale, thinner, but softer. She reached out and touched the glass, whispering, "I used to hate this woman, but now, I think I finally understand her." I stood beside her, our reflections framed together, two people aged by mistakes yet softened by time. That night, before turning off the lights, she said something that stayed with me forever. "Rafiq," she murmured, her voice trembling, "you were never useless. I was just too proud to see how much I needed you." For a long time, I couldn't speak. My throat ached. All I could manage was a quiet, "Rest now, Sadia." And as she drifted to sleep, I realized that sometimes life gives you justice, not through revenge, but through grace. The days after Arif's arrest felt like the aftermath of an earthquake, the kind where everything still stands, but nothing is stable anymore. Newspapers carried the story briefly: corporate executive arrested in fraud scandal. The name wasn't famous enough to make front pages, but it was loud enough to echo in the circles Sadia once called her world. Her phone, which once buzzed with endless notifications, now sat on the table like a dead thing. No messages, no calls, not even the friends who used to invite her to those glamorous rooftop dinners. It was as if the world had collectively decided to erase her existence. For days, she barely spoke. She'd sit near the window, staring outside at nothing, the letter of Arif's arrest still folded neatly on the table beside her. One morning, I found her sitting on the veranda, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, the early chill brushing her cheeks. She didn't notice me until I placed a cup of tea beside her. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice had grown softer, not weak, but quieter, more human. I sat next to her. The neighborhood was waking up, a boy sweeping the street, the milkman ringing his bicycle bell, a dog barking in the distance. Ordinary sounds, real sounds, the kind of life we had forgotten while chasing something shinier. After a long silence, she finally said, "It's strange." "What is?" I asked. "When everything was perfect, I never noticed how lonely I was." I turned to her. Perfection hides loneliness well. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, but at least tries. I thought love meant being admired. I thought power meant security. But the moment both disappeared, only you remained. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Sometimes truth doesn't need commentary, just space to breathe. That afternoon, she asked if we could visit her old office. "Just once," she said. "I want to face it." We went together. The building loomed tall and glassy, the same place she used to walk into with her chin high and her heels sharp. Now, she stood at the entrance with trembling knees, watching other women walk out confidently, holding their files, their phones pressed to their ears, echoes of who she once was. We didn't go inside. She just looked at the nameplate for a long moment and whispered goodbye. Then she turned away. In that small act, I saw her reclaim something, not pride, but peace. That evening, she called Hira to her room. "Mama needs your help," she said gently. Hira climbed onto the bed beside her. Together they went through Sadia's old jewelry box. Piece by piece, she took out gold bangles, earrings, and necklaces, each wrapped in old tissue. Hira's eyes widened. "Mama, are we selling them?" Sadia smiled. "No, we're saving them for your future, but not for decoration, for education." Hira frowned. "Education." Sadia nodded. "Yes. When you grow up, don't marry someone for money or power. Marry someone who brings you peace. Learn that first." I stood at the doorway, watching silently. That single sentence felt like an entire apology written in invisible ink. That night, while putting Hira to bed, Sadia joined me. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching our daughter fall asleep. The faint glow of the night light lit her face, calm, unguarded, real. "I used to think you were weak," she said quietly. "And now?" I asked. "Now I know strength isn't in earning or winning. It's in staying when everything tells you to leave." For the first time, her words didn't sting. They felt like closure. Over the next few weeks, life began to find rhythm again. I started getting small accounting projects from local shops, enough to keep things running. Sadia began helping Hira with her homework, even cooking simple meals again. It wasn't the life we had before. It was simpler, smaller, but infinitely more honest. One afternoon, I returned from work early and found Sadia sitting at the table with her laptop. She was typing, her brow furrowed in concentration. "What are you doing?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Writing." "Writing?" "Yes, a proposal. There's a small NGO that helps single mothers start home-based businesses. I'm thinking of volunteering." I couldn't hide my surprise. "That's wonderful." She shrugged lightly. "Maybe it's time I did something meaningful." The following weeks, I saw her come back to life, not as the woman she was before, but as someone humbler, kinder. She'd come home with stories of the women she met, widows, divorcees, mothers, all struggling, all fighting. "They remind me of myself," she said one night, "except they never had a Rafiq." That statement hit me hard, because in that one line, I realized she didn't just regret losing money or status. She regretted losing me long before she realized it. Months passed, the seasons changed, our home filled with laughter again, Hira's school projects scattered across the living room, Sadia humming softly while hanging close to dry. One evening, while we were having dinner, dinner. She looked up suddenly and said, Rafiq, can I ask you something? Of course. When you looked at me back then, when I was cruel, selfish, what did you see that made you stay? I thought about it for a long moment before answering. I saw someone who was lost, and I knew if I left, you'd never find your way back. She lowered her gaze, tears glistening. And now I see someone who finally came home. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Then she reached across the table, her hand brushing mine gently, not in romance, but in gratitude. It was the first time she had touched me in years. That touch said everything words couldn't. Later that night, as I turned off the lights, I heard her whisper softly in the dark, You saved me, Rafi. I smiled, half asleep. No, Sadia, I murmured. You saved yourself. I just waited long enough to see it happen. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I slept without the weight of yesterday pressing on my chest. The next morning felt different. The sunlight that streamed through our windows didn't feel intrusive anymore. It felt like a quiet guest, one that belonged here. The walls, once echoing with arguments and cold silences, now hummed with a simple rhythm of normal life. Sadia stood in the kitchen, carefully stirring tea. It was the first time I'd seen her cook in years. Her movements were slower now, almost meditative. When she noticed me watching from the doorway, she smiled, a small, genuine smile. It's not perfect, she said, but it's mine. I walked in and took the cup from her hand. It doesn't need to be perfect, I said softly. It just needs to be real. She chuckled, a faint sound, almost shy. You always knew how to make ordinary things sound profound. Maybe ordinary is all I ever wanted, I replied. The tea was sweet, perhaps too sweet, but I drank it anyway. It wasn't about taste anymore. It was about what it meant. Later that day, Hira burst into the room, clutching a piece of paper. Mama, I got selected, she shouted. Sadia looked up. Selected? For what? For the storytelling competition at school. Hira beamed. I wrote something special about you and Baba. Sadia's eyes widened. About us. Hira nodded proudly. It's called The Man Who Stayed. Sadia's breath caught. She turned to me, eyes glistening. She's her father's daughter, she whispered. That evening, we all sat together in the living room while Hira practiced her story. Her little voice carried more weight than she understood. There once was a man who everyone said was useless, she began. He didn't have money, or fancy clothes, or a big house. But when everyone left, he was the only one who stayed. And sometimes, staying is the bravest thing of all. Sadia's eyes welled with tears. I could see her lips tremble as she listened. Every word was a mirror reflecting our lives back at us. When Hira finished, we clapped. She bowed dramatically. Did I do good? She asked. Sadia pulled her into a tight hug. You did perfect, Mary John. Her voice cracked, and for the first time in months, she didn't try to hide it. Later that night, after putting Hira to bed, Sadia and I sat outside under the stars. The city buzzed faintly in the distance, but here it was quiet. Do you ever wonder, she asked suddenly, if all of this was supposed to happen? The mistakes, the pain, even Arif. I looked up at the stars. Maybe some storms don't come to destroy us. Maybe they come to clear our path. She nodded slowly, thinking. I spent so many years chasing light outside the home that I forgot how much of it was already here. Her words hung between us, glowing in the silence. The next few months became a time of slow healing. Sadia continued volunteering at the NGO. She'd come home with stories, women who'd lost everything but refused to give up, mothers rebuilding their lives from ashes. She wasn't just helping them, she was learning from them. One evening, she came home late, her clothes lightly dusted, her hands tired but her face alive. We set up our first microloan group today, she said proudly. 5 women will be starting small businesses next week. That's amazing, I said, smiling. She nodded. It feels strange, though. For the first time, I'm not chasing success for myself. I'm helping others find theirs. And it feels lighter. I watched her speak, animated, passionate, her eyes glowing with something purer than ambition. That woman I fell in love with years ago, before the pride and pressure, she was back. A few days later, we attended Hira's storytelling competition. The auditorium was full of parents and children, the air thick with excitement. When Hira's name was called, she walked confidently to the stage, her small hands holding the microphone like it was a treasure. She began her story again, The Man Who Stayed. But this time, her words echoed through the room, reaching hearts that didn't even know her story. By the time she finished, the audience was silent for a moment before applause erupted. Sadia's tears flowed freely as she turned to me. That story, it's us. I smiled. It's her way of forgiving both of us. Hira won second place that day, but to us, she was first in every way that mattered. When we came home, we framed her certificate and hung it near the entrance. Sadia stood staring at it for a while, her fingers brushing the frame. It's funny, she said softly. This small piece of paper means more than all the awards I ever won. Because this one carries truth, I said. She turned to me, eyes shimmering. And love. That night, as she got ready for bed, she paused near the window and looked out at the sky. You know, she said, I used to pray for success every night. But lately, I just thank God that you didn't give up on me. I smiled faintly. Maybe God didn't give up on you either. He just sent me as a reminder. She laughed through her tears, shaking her head. You always have the last word, don't you? Only when it's about you, I said, and we both laughed, genuinely freely. In that laughter, I realized something profound. Forgiveness doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes, it comes in tea shared quietly, in a child's story, in laughter that sounds like like home again. That was the night I stopped thinking about what we lost, because somehow, through the fire, we had found something far greater: peace. The monsoon returned that year, gentle and unhurried, as if even the rain had learned to soften its voice. Our little house smelled of cardamom tea and damper. Outside, sparrows fluttered in the puddles near the gate. Inside, Sadia sat by the window, wrapped in a shawl, sketching something on a notepad. Her hands still trembled sometimes, but her smile no longer did. I watched her quietly from the porch, my cup of tea warming my palms. There was something deeply humbling about seeing the person who once broke you, now mending slowly under the same roof, and realizing that you've both been healing each other in silence. Hira ran past me, her laughter slicing through the lazy rhythm of raindrops. Baba, Mama says we can go to the bazaar later. I smiled. Only if you promise not to buy another dozen bangles. She giggled, the kind of sound that makes the world feel innocent again. Inside, Sadia looked up. Let her, she said softly. You used to love the sound of her bangles. I nodded, and for a moment, the years melted away. All the bitterness, the shouting, the nights on the couch. What remained was this: three people who had nearly lost everything, learning to love again, one ordinary day at a time. The days stretched gently, filled with small victories. Sadia could now walk longer distances, climb stairs without help. She started teaching online classes to young women who couldn't afford tuition. Sometimes I'd hear her voice from the other room, calm, confident, kind. The same voice that once scolded and cut now guided and encouraged. In those moments, I understood what real redemption looked like, not in grand apologies or loud transformations, but in the quiet consistency of trying to be better every single day. One evening, while I was fixing the small wooden shelf near our doorway, she called out, Rafiq. Yes. She hesitated. I want to ask you something. I turned to her. Go ahead. Her eyes softened. Why did you stay? After everything I said, after what I did? For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The rain had stopped, and all I could hear was the distant call of the azan. Finally, I said, because walking away is easy, but loving someone through their worst, that's what turns love into faith. Her eyes filled instantly. She took a step closer, then another, until she was right in front of me. I don't deserve you, she whispered. I smiled gently. Maybe not, but maybe it's not about deserving. Maybe it's about needing to grow together again. She reached out and touched my cheek. Then thank you for not giving up on us. I covered her hand with mine. Thank you for finding your way back. That night, after dinner, I found her sitting on the bed, reading an old notebook. She handed it to me. Inside were letters, pages written but never sent. Some to me, some to herself. I used to write these when I felt empty, she said quietly, to remind myself that I was still human. I flipped through the pages, words soaked in guilt, apology, hope. One line caught my eye. If he ever forgives me, I'll spend the rest of my life forgiving myself. I closed the notebook gently. You already have, I said. She looked at me as if I'd handed her peace itself. Days turned into weeks, and the world outside continued its chaos, deadlines, traffic noise. But inside our home, everything had slowed to a tender rhythm. We ate together, prayed together, sometimes even argued gently over TV channels. It wasn't perfection. It was life, fragile, messy, real. One Sunday morning, the doorbell rang. The postman handed me an envelope stamped with an official seal. It was from Arif's office. My heart paused for a second as I gave it to Sadia. She opened it slowly, her hand steady. Inside was a formal letter. Mr. Arif Malik has been convicted of corporate fraud and sentenced to 3 years in prison. She stared at the paper for a long moment, her lips trembling. Then she let out a long, shuddering sigh, not of pain, but of release. I thought I'd feel angry, she whispered, but all I feel is sorry. Maybe that's what forgiveness really looks like, I said softly, when even justice doesn't need revenge. She nodded, tears glistening but calm this time. I don't want to remember him. I just want to remember what I almost lost because of him. She placed the letter in a drawer, closed it, and turned the key. It's over, she said quietly. I smiled. Then let's never open that drawer again. That evening, as the sun dipped low, painting our small world in gold, I realized something. Peace doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It sneaks in quietly, in laughter shared over tea, in the gentle brush of her hand against mine, in the way Hira's voice filled the rooms again. I looked at Sadia sitting beside me, her head resting lightly on my shoulder, and I felt a deep calm settle inside me, the kind that comes when every storm has finally passed. Months slipped into seasons, and life found its rhythm again, not in grand celebrations, but in the quiet hum of ordinary days. The air around our home carried a strange, beautiful peace. It wasn't loud or proud. It was gentle, like a sigh that follows forgiveness. Every morning, I sat on the porch with my cup of chai, watching the light crawl up the walls. Sadia often joined me, her shawl loosely draped, her face calm. She would read the newspaper aloud, sometimes politics, sometimes poetry. Hira would leave for school, waving from the gate, her laughter echoing down the lane. Those simple sights felt sacred to me, maybe because I knew how easily I could have lost them. Sometimes, people think love ends with betrayal. But love, the real kind, is more stubborn than that. It bends, it bruises, it even breaks for a while, yet somehow it learns to heal. What Sadia and I shared wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about carrying it with grace. One evening, while watering the plants, she said something that stayed with me. Do you know, she murmured, I used used to call you useless because I thought power meant control. But now I see, the one who forgives holds the real power. Her voice trembled as she spoke, and the watering can slip slightly from her hand. I caught it, steadying her fingers. Power fades, I said softly, but dignity lasts. She smiled, that slow, tired, peaceful smile that had become her new face. And dignity is what you never lost, Rafiq. That night, as we prepared dinner together, the radio played an old ghazal we used to love during our university days. The melody filled the room like a familiar memory returning home. Sadia hummed along under her breath. I joined her quietly. For a moment, we weren't two people scarred by mistakes. We were just Rafiq and Sadia again, two dreamers with tea-stained laughter and too many hopes. Later, when Hira went to bed, I stepped outside to close the gate. The streetlights glowed dimly through the mist, and somewhere far away, a muezzin called out the last azan. I paused and looked up at the night sky, clear, endless, forgiving. That was when I realized the full circle of it all. The woman who once called me useless now trusted me with her life. The house that once echoed with anger now breathed peace. And the man who once slept on the couch, broken and humiliated, now found strength not in pride, but in quiet love. Sometimes God doesn't remove the people who hurt us. He changes them, and in doing so, He changes us too. In the end, forgiveness isn't about saying, you were right. It's about saying, my peace matters more. If you ask me now whether I'd go through it all again, the job loss, the insult, the heartbreak, I think I would, because that pain carved me into someone softer, stronger, and more patient. It taught me that a man's worth isn't measured by what he earns or commands. It's measured by how he stands when love tests him. One evening, as Sadia was folding laundry, she found the old note I'd once left on her table, the one that simply said, I forgive you. She looked at me with wet eyes and whispered, you have no idea how much that note saved me. I smiled faintly. It saved me too. We stood there in silence, the sunset painting her face gold. I thought about everything we had survived, and for the first time, I felt truly free. That night, after dinner, Hira asked, Baba, what does forgiveness mean? I thought for a moment and said, it means remembering without bitterness. She nodded as if she understood, though maybe she didn't yet. But one day she would. As the house fell quiet, I sat again on the porch, the same place where the story had once begun, with a man who thought he had lost everything. The rain had stopped, and the night smelled of wet earth and jasmine. I could hear Sadia moving softly inside, humming. I closed my eyes and whispered to the silence. She called me useless that night, but the next morning, she needed me. And I chose to be needed, not to prove her wrong, but to remind myself that love isn't weakness. It's endurance. For a moment, everything was still, the kind of stillness that feels like peace earned, not given. And as the moonlight spread across our little home, I realized sometimes life gives us back what we lost, but only after we've learned how to hold it gently. Moral reflection: forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about freeing yourself from the chains of pride and pain. Love doesn't always look like romance. Sometimes it looks like patience, like silence, like staying when it would be easier to leave. True strength is quiet. It doesn't shout. It simply endures until the light returns. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who might need a reminder that love and forgiveness can rebuild even the most broken homes. Leave a comment below. Tell me where you're listening from and what part of Rafiq's journey resonated with you most. And if you'd like to hear more emotional life lesson stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next one. Thank you for listening, and remember, even when the world calls you useless, your kindness will always have a purpose.